I'm not what you'd call a paranoid person. Not really. I check the doors before bed. I don't like talking to strangers in parking lots, that kind of thing, but I've never believed in ghosts or cryptids or underground government bunkers. That said, I can't stop thinking about what happened last October. My girlfriend, Laura, and I had been together for 2 years. We were city people, really, bars, bookstores, loud street corners. But every once in a while, we'd get this itch to escape all the concrete and noise. So when her cousin offered us their cabin for a long weekend up in the Catskills, we were all in. The first 2 days were peaceful. Rain on the tin roof, coffee that actually tasted like coffee, sex with no neighbors banging on the wall. The quiet was cleansing. Still, by day 3, we were both getting a little stir-crazy. No service. No Netflix. Just books and board games and staring at trees. That's when we decided to take a walk. We didn't plan a route or anything, just grabbed our coats, boots, and one of those shitty trail mix bags we never finish. It was a perfect fall day, gray sky, dead leaves crunching underfoot, the smell of wet bark and earth all around us. We stuck to a barely there path, one that twisted between pine trunks and bramble. Every so often, we'd stop to admire some mushrooms or laugh at a squirrel fight. It was nice. Then, after maybe 45 minutes of walking, we saw it. The ground sloped down suddenly, and just past the fallen tree, there was this wide, jagged hole in the hillside. I thought it might have been a cave at first, but as we got closer, it became clear. There were old, rusted rails leading into the darkness. A mine shaft. Long abandoned. Lara's face lit up. "You don't see stuff like this back in Queens." I laughed. "Yeah, and you don't catch black lung in Queens either." But she was already stepping down toward the opening, crouching a bit to look inside. I followed, reluctantly. The air that poured out of that mine was cold, not cool, not breezy. It was like opening a freezer after a long power outage. It smelled like stone and metal, and something else, something musty. Old. Lara stood just at the edge of the darkness. "Should we go in?" It wasn't a serious question. Not really. But the thing is, we were bored, curious, a little stir-crazy. And in hindsight, that's always when the worst decisions happen, when you're not really trying to do anything bad, just trying to feel something. I still wonder if we were being watched, even then. We didn't go far. At least, that's what I tell myself now. Lara had her phone out, using the flashlight, even though we both knew it wouldn't last more than a couple hours if we needed it. I had mine too, but I kept it off. I was still pretending we'd just peek inside for a few minutes. In and out. No big deal. The mine entrance was partially collapsed on one side, and the wooden support beams were splintered and blackened like they'd been burned or maybe just rotted with time. The rails disappeared into darkness like a tongue vanishing down a throat. About 10 feet in, the light started to change. The trees outside weren't that far away, but they felt miles off. It was like stepping into a bunker, like the earth was swallowing up sound. Even our voices went flat. No echo. No birds. No breeze. I told Lara, "Let's just go a little further, then we head back." She nodded, but she didn't stop walking. The deeper we went, the more I noticed these strange markings on the walls. Not carvings, more like stains. Reddish, brownish, streaking down the rock. Some of them looked like hands, others like just rust. I figured they were from the iron ore or whatever had been mined here, but Lara stopped to take a photo. She said, "You think they left this place because of a collapse or something?" "Maybe. Or maybe because this place is creepy as hell." She grinned, but I noticed she didn't laugh. The flashlight beam started catching things just beyond the edge of the path. Chunks of machinery, bent tools, something that looked like a broken helmet. But then, we hit something that made both of us stop cold. There was a second tunnel. Smaller. Narrower. It branched off to the left, maybe 30 feet ahead. There were no tracks going into it. Just a gap in the stone like someone had taken a dull knife and carved it out by hand. And next to that opening, something was scratched into the wall. Not spray paint. Not chalk. Scratched deep through the stone. You could tell it had taken time. It read, "Stay out of the second mouth." I read it out loud without thinking. Lara immediately said, "Jesus, that's weird." We stared into that side tunnel for a long minute. My heart was beating a little faster, but I couldn't explain why. It wasn't like there was a noise or anything. It was just wrong. The darkness in there wasn't the same kind of dark. It felt thicker. Lara pulled her phone back up and aimed the light into the side tunnel. We both froze. About 15 feet in, there was something on the ground. Not a person, at least I don't think so. It looked like a bundle of rags at first. But then one of the rags shifted, just barely, like something had stirred under it. We both took a step back at the same time. "Let's go," I said. Lara didn't argue. She just turned around, and we started walking fast. Too fast to look brave, too slow to call it running. That's when the flashlight on her phone flickered. Just once. A little hiccup of light. But in that blink, I swear I saw something further down the tunnel behind us. Something moving. And it wasn't following the rails. It was crawling. We didn't talk, we just moved. Fast. My brain was screaming not to run, like some old primal instinct knew it would trigger something worse, but every part of me wanted to sprint out of there. My legs felt tight, like I was dreaming, like I was trying to move through molasses. Lara whispered, "Did you see?" "Yeah," I cut in. "Keep walking." Our lights stayed steady now, almost like they were behaving, like whatever flickered them had been a warning, a test. And the longer we walked in silence, the more I started to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a trick of the light. A shadow. A lump of rock that looked like it moved because I was moving. But we were still half a football field from the entrance when we heard the sound. Not behind us, ahead. Metal scraping on stone. Slow. Deliberate. We stopped. Lara gripped my arm, nails digging into my jacket sleeve. We turned our lights forward, and for a second, we didn't see anything. The tunnel ahead was empty. The tracks led out into the weak daylight that barely reached inside. Then something shifted just beyond the threshold of light. A glint of rusted metal. A shape, low to the ground, like an animal crouched behind a pile of rock. It scuttled left, out of view. I don't even remember making the decision. 1 second we were frozen, the next we were running. This time I didn't care about the noise or if it followed or whether I tripped on the uneven rails. I just needed to be outside. When we broke into the open air, it felt like we'd surfaced from underwater. I gasped, bending over with my hands on my knees, heart thundering in my ears. Lara was pale, shaking, but didn't say anything. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, staring back at the mine entrance. Nothing came out. No sound. No movement. Just that gaping black mouth, patient and silent. "I don't want to talk about it yet," Lara said finally. So we didn't. We hiked back to the cabin in silence, turning around every so often, jumping at every bird call or snapped twig. The woods felt different now. Watched. The peace we'd felt before was just gone. When we got back, I locked the door behind us. For the first time since we'd arrived, I noticed how thin the windows were. How easy it would be for something, or someone, to watch us from the trees. Lara took a long shower. I sat on the couch, staring out the front window, phone in my lap, no signal, no Wi-Fi. As the sky darkened, something started gnawing at me. A little thread of thought I kept trying to ignore. That thing, in the tunnel, it didn't feel like some homeless person or animal. It felt like something that used to be human. Like it remembered standing. Remembered being part of the world. But now it lived in the second mouth. That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind felt like breathing against the windowpane. I lay there with my eyes on the ceiling, counting the seconds between tree branch taps on the roof. Lara eventually crawled into bed beside me, her body tense and cold. She didn't say anything, just slid under the blanket like she was hiding from something. I asked, "You okay?" She nodded against my shoulder. Then she whispered, "It wasn't rust on the walls." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she was already turning away, curling in on herself like a dying thing. Around 3 a.m., I finally got up and sat in the living room, facing the window again. The woods were pitch black beyond the porch. I could just barely make out the outline of trees swaying in the wind. I didn't want to admit it, but something was wrong now. Not just the mine. The whole place. The air felt too still. The shadows didn't behave right. And the cabin, it had always creaked, like any old wooden house, but now the sounds felt purposeful. I kept hearing what sounded like whispers from the walls. Too quiet to understand. But they didn't stop. I leaned my ear against the paneling beside the fireplace. Stupid, I know. But there was definitely something there. Not voices, exactly. More like the rhythm of voices. Something mimicking human speech from far away, without actually using words. Like the memory of someone praying behind a closed door. I sat up fast, heart in my throat. Then came the knock. One soft knock, right on the back wall. Not the door. The wall. I stood frozen. No way to explain it. There was no entrance on that side of the house, just an empty slope leading back into the forest. It had to be the pipes. Or a raccoon. Something normal. But the knock came again. This time it was 3 taps. Then silence. I backed away slowly, grabbed the fireplace poker without even thinking about it, and stared at the wall like it might split open. Nothing happened. The silence stretched. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. That isolation messes with your head. That none of this meant anything. Lara barely spoke. She sat at the little table with a cup of tea she didn't drink, and just stared out the window. Finally I asked, "What did you mean last night? About the walls in the mine?" She turned to me, slow. "The stains," she said. "They weren't rust. They weren't from the tools either." "Then what?" She swallowed. "They were fingernails." I stared at her. "What?" "Scraping. Dragging. Clawing. All in one direction, away from the second tunnel." She looked like she was going to cry, but her eyes stayed dry. Then she whispered, "I think someone tried to seal it shut. We should have packed up and left right then. Hell, we should have run the second we saw that second tunnel, never looked back." But fear doesn't always work the way you expect. Sometimes it freezes you. Makes you linger. Makes you curious. And something about that mine had wormed into our heads. We didn't go back. Not physically. But we couldn't leave it alone either. That morning, while Lara stood in the doorway hugging herself, I did the stupidest thing I could have done. I turned my phone back on, opened the camera roll, and started zooming in on the photos she'd taken in the mine. I don't know what I was expecting. Proof? Closure? But I didn't find that. The photos she took of the second tunnel, where the shape had been, looked normal at first. Just a grainy image of rock and shadow. But as I zoomed in, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not the crawling thing. Not clearly. No, carvings. Faint, almost eroded, just inside the frame. Etched into the stone around the tunnel's mouth. Dozens of tiny symbols. I didn't recognize them, but they were deliberate. Patterned. Like pictographs. And they seemed to form a ring around the tunnel, like a barrier. Lara came up behind me and froze. "You see them too?" she said. She didn't sound surprised. Just tired. I nodded. "What the hell do you think they mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the kitchen, opened one of the drawers, and came back holding a folded, yellowed paper. "I found this in the nightstand drawer the first day we got here," she said. "Didn't think it meant anything." It was a page from a journal. Maybe part of a diary. Old. Smelled like mildew and dust. She handed it to me. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, like the person had been in a hurry, or panicked. The last third was smudged, but I read what I could. Third warning now. The voices are louder. They mimic. They copy. Not all of them come out during the day. The second mouth is older than the mine. We didn't dig it, we found it. And we should have filled it with concrete, not prayers. I keep waking with dirt under my fingernails. My nails are shorter every morning. It's trying to learn me. That last line chilled me to the bone. Learn me? What does that mean? We stared at each other in the silence. Outside, the trees swayed like they were whispering secrets just beyond the glass. That's when my phone buzzed. Full screen. One new notification. Signal acquired, 1 bar. It shouldn't have been possible. We were too deep in the woods. I opened my messages. Nothing new. But then a photo started auto-downloading. No name. No sender. Just an image. It was blurry at first, still processing, the little loading wheel spinning. Lara leaned in. Then the photo finished loading. And it was us. Standing in the mine. From behind. Taken deep in the tunnel, in complete darkness. Neither of us was holding a phone. And at the very edge of the frame, a long hand was reaching toward my shoulder. We stared at that photo for a long time. Lara didn't speak. I don't think she could. Her mouth was open just a little, like she was trying to breathe through a small hole in her throat. I could see her hands trembling at her sides. I zoomed in. The photo quality degraded with each pinch, but the hand, that long, unnatural thing, remained clear enough. It wasn't human. The fingers were too thin, the joints wrong. It looked like it had once learned the shape of a human hand but hadn't gotten it quite right. Lara whispered. Check the timestamp. I did. It had been taken the day before. At 2:34 p.m. We were in the mine at that time. But neither of us took that picture. And even if someone had followed us inside, which was already terrifying, the angle was all wrong. The photo was taken from high up, maybe 10 feet off the ground. Like someone, or something, had clung to the tunnel ceiling and watched. I started pacing. My skin felt too tight for my body. We need to go, I said. Lara didn't answer. I'm not joking. We need to get our stuff and go. Right now. That's when I noticed she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking out the window. Not moving. Not blinking. I followed her gaze. There was a shape in the trees. Not moving. Just standing there, half hidden between two trunks. It was too far to make out details. Maybe 30 yards off. But I knew one thing immediately. It wasn't watching the cabin. It was watching Lara. I stepped in front of the window, blocking her view. We're leaving, I said again, sharper now. Grab your bag. She blinked a few times like coming out of a trance. Then nodded. We didn't pack much. Just clothes, chargers, and the keys to the car. But when I opened the door, there were footprints. All over the porch. Muddy. Barefoot. Leading up to the door, but none going away. I felt the blood drain from my face. Lara grabbed my sleeve. Look! She pointed at the ground just beyond the steps. A small wooden totem had been placed there, upright in the dirt. It looked like it had been carved from a branch, about the size of my fist. The top was a crude face, eyes scratched deep, mouth open in a scream. The body was wrapped in what looked like old shoelaces or sinew. I didn't touch it. I didn't even want to breathe near it. We drove out of there without a word. Didn't even look in the rear view. And for a while, I thought we'd escaped. That the story ended there. But it didn't. Because something followed us home. We made it back to Queens by evening, a 6-hour drive barely broken by 2 gas station stops and one silent bathroom break where I swear Lara didn't blink once. She just stood at the sink, staring into the mirror like she expected her reflection to do something she wasn't doing herself. We didn't talk about the mine. Not in the car, not when we got home. We unpacked like robots. Put our bags by the door. Took turns showering. It was like trying to press unsee. But here's the thing, When you leave a place that's wrong, truly wrong, the world outside doesn't look normal anymore. It looks like a stage play where everything is just a little too still, a little too deliberate. That first night back, Laura and I slept in the same bed but facing opposite directions, both pretending the other had already drifted off. And then, the smells started. The next morning, I woke to something cold and metallic in the back of my throat. It wasn't a smell exactly, more like the memory of one. That damp stone scent from the mine. The iron in the air. The kind that makes your teeth hurt if you breathe too deep. I opened my eyes, and Lara was already sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. "You smell it too," she said without turning around. I nodded. "It's probably nothing. A leak. Mold maybe." She didn't respond. We checked every vent. Every pipe. Opened every window. Cleaned the drains. Nothing. Our apartment wasn't old, and we'd never had any issues before. But no matter what we did, the air stayed thick. Like we were still underground. And then things started to repeat. I don't know how else to explain it. I'd find the bathroom door cracked exactly the same way each night. I'd close it, and the next morning it would be cracked again, down to the inch. My toothbrush kept moving 2 inches to the left. The same 2 inches every time. One night, I found a small pile of dirt on my pillow. No explanation. No footprints. Just a little heap of earth like something had dug its way into my dreams and left evidence behind. I started staying up later and later, just listening. The scratching started on the 3rd night. It came from inside the walls. Not mice. Not rats. I know what those sound like. This was different, deliberate. Like nails. Human nails. Scraping in a slow, dragging rhythm. Always late. Always just before I drifted off. Then the whispers came back. Same as the cabin. Muffled. Foreign. Not words, but cadences. Like something trying to sound like us. Like it was repeating the idea of language without knowing what it meant. Lara was getting worse. She started talking to herself in the bathroom with the faucet running. I only noticed when I walked past and heard her whispering something soft and rhythmic, like a chant. She'd stop the second I got close. When I finally confronted her, she looked at me like I was the stranger. "They don't like being ignored," she said. I asked. "Who?" She looked past me, toward the hallway. Toward the bedroom. Then she said something that still makes my stomach knot. "I think we brought a piece of the second mouth back with us." After that, everything slipped. The apartment didn't feel like our place anymore. It felt like something was pretending to be home, like we'd walked into a perfect replica, but one detail was always off. Like the light switches felt rougher. Or the water pressure changed. Or the floorboards creaked in places they never had before. I started leaving the lights on at night. Lara began sleeping on the couch with a blanket over her face. The scratching in the walls got closer. One night I sat in the hallway, back against the door, and just listened. The sound was right there, inside the drywall. Then it moved. Down. Slowly. Into the floor. Into the crawl space. That's when I realized we don't have a crawl space. I tried to pull myself together. Told Lara we needed help. A priest. A therapist. Anyone. She just smiled without showing her teeth and said, "Help doesn't go where it can't breathe." That night, I dreamed of the mine. Only it wasn't just a tunnel anymore, it was a throat. The walls flexed and pulsed like muscle. There were no tracks. No carvings. Just an endless crawl space stretching forward, and me, dragging my body through it on bleeding elbows. I woke up coughing. Mouth full of dirt. Not metaphorically. Real, wet, black earth caked around my tongue and gums. I ran to the sink, spitting, dry heaving. Lara stood in the hallway, eyes glazed over. She said, "It likes you now." I shouted, slammed the bedroom door, and finally did what I should have done days earlier. I tried to leave. I grabbed my keys, phone, wallet, didn't even put on shoes. I ran down the stairs 2 at a time and burst out into the street like a drowning man breaking surface. But something was off. Too quiet. The city never goes fully silent, not even at 3 a.m. But this? No sirens. No footsteps. No hum of faraway traffic. Just one thing. The sound of scraping, coming from behind the storm drains. I turned to look, and every single manhole cover on the block had a faint trail of muddy handprints leading out from it. I didn't stop running until I hit the bodega on 9th. It was locked up tight, but the fluorescent lights buzzed comfortingly behind the metal grate. I stood there like it was a lighthouse. And when I finally turned back toward the street, Laura was standing across from me. Barefoot. Covered in dirt. Smiling. But here's the thing. I'd left her upstairs. And she hadn't brought her keys. She raised her hand and pointed behind me. And from behind the dumpster, something long and pale pulled itself into the light. Not running. Not attacking. Just watching. Like it was waiting for me to remember something. Something I'd left behind in the dark. I didn't go home that night. I walked until sunrise. Nowhere specific, just kept moving, cutting through alleys, ducking into 24-hour diners and convenience stores like I was outrunning a shadow that could fit through keyholes. When I finally doubled back to our apartment around 7 a.m., my legs were rubber. My throat burned. I half expected the door to be gone, or worse, open. But it was shut. Locked. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. Laura was sitting at the table, hair wet, wrapped in her robe like she just stepped out of the shower. She smiled like nothing had happened. "Hey," she said. "Sleep okay?" I stared at her for a long time. "I saw you last night," I said. "Outside. On 9th Street. You didn't have shoes. You couldn't have gotten there." She blinked. Tilted her head. "I haven't left the apartment," she said softly. I didn't believe her. I wanted to. But something in her voice was too clean. Too rehearsed. Like she'd practiced that line. I backed away and locked myself in the bathroom. Pushed the mirror cabinet aside, checked the corners, checked the vents. My eyes were red. My fingernails were black at the edges. I'd cleaned them. I know I had. Something was coming loose in my head. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The next few days were a blur. I stopped going to work. My boss called twice. I didn't answer. I barely ate. Laura would hum these low, tuneless melodies while standing at the window for hours. When I asked her what she was thinking, she'd say, "Nothing." But there was something tight in her jaw. Something intentional. Then came the knock. Middle of the night again. 3 sharp taps. Not on the front door. On the hall closet. I stood in the living room, staring at it. The knock came again, 3 more taps. Same rhythm as the cabin. I opened the door. Empty. Except, not quite. There was a small pile of dirt on the floor. And something buried in it. I knelt down slowly. Brushed the soil aside. It was a Polaroid. Of me. Standing in the mine. Eyes wide. Mouth open like I was screaming. Except I didn't remember screaming. And I sure as hell didn't remember anyone taking my picture. The handwriting on the bottom was scratchy, scrawled in some kind of reddish ink. "You never left." That night, I dreamed of Laura again. But it wasn't her. Her face was wrong. Jaw too long. Eyes unfocused. Like someone had worn her skin for too long and forgot how it fit. She knelt beside my bed and whispered something over and over. "The second mouth never closes. It just waits." I woke up choking again. This time, it wasn't dirt. It was ash. I haven't slept in days. Every time I shut my eyes, I feel it. Like something's waiting just behind the skin of the world. Like reality's a sheet stretched too thin, and underneath it is something breathing. Lara's gone. I don't mean she left. I mean one day she walked into the kitchen and never came back out. I heard the faucet run. I heard the floor creak. And then, nothing. I called her name until my throat went raw. There was no answer. No body. No sound. Just a faint trail of dirt across the linoleum, leading to the hall closet again. I haven't opened it since. I don't need to. Because I know what I'll find. I know what I brought back with me. It's in the walls now. In the pipes. In the mirror. Sometimes it shows me reflections that don't belong to me, versions of myself that are pale, grinning, too still. Sometimes I catch glimpses of a second version of this apartment, like a film overlay, rotted, dripping, underground. It's always wet in that version. Always breathing. And the symbols, they're spreading. On my walls. My ceiling. Behind the plaster. Like they were written there before the building ever stood. I think the mind wasn't a place. I think it was a threshold. That second tunnel? That mouth? It's not just a passage, it's a hunger. Something that feeds on attention. On curiosity. And when you step too close, when you look too long, you don't get taken. You get mirrored. Replaced. I think Lara's still out there somewhere. Maybe the real her is trapped, somewhere under that mountain, scratching and bleeding and begging for someone to close the second mouth for good. But I don't think we can. I think once you've seen it, it sees you back. And now I see it everywhere. In sidewalk cracks. In subway tunnels. In the spaces behind my eyes when I blink too long. I tried moving. Didn't help. I tried burning the old photos, the notes, the totem. Nothing. It always comes back. Sometimes, at night, I hear Lara's voice whispering from the vent above my bed. Only it's not quite right. It says my name over and over. But like it's still trying to learn how. Like it's almost got the shape of me figured out. Like the thing in the second mouth is nearly done wearing me. And once it does, the first thing it'll do is open the closet and let something else out.